When my company collapsed, I lost everything in a single month. My wife Nora packed her bags, took Clara and Henry by the hand, and walked out without looking back. Friends who once crowded around my table for barbecues stopped answering my calls, and my own brother Ezra, the one I trusted most, stared me in the eye and said, "You're nothing but a worthless failure. You've shamed our family." I thought the humiliation couldn't cut deeper, but 2 weeks later, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but something in me answered. A voice, low and unfamiliar, spoke one sentence that froze the blood in my veins. "Check under your father's grave. There's a box with your name on it." That night, with my hands trembling and my chest tight with dread, I carried a shovel into the cemetery. I dug through the cold earth until metal struck wood. My heart slammed against my ribs as I brushed the dirt away. The lid of the box was carved with one word: Calvin. My name is Calvin Mercer. I'm 42 years old, and until last year I thought I had built a life that could not be shaken. For 15 years, I ran a lumber mill in the town of Stoneford, a place where everyone knows your name, and reputation carries more weight than money in the bank. I was proud of the mill, not just because it put food on my table, but because it carried my father's legacy. Raymond Mercer had worked these woods before me, his hands rough from the saws, his back bent from the weight of labor. He taught me early that a man's worth was tied to how hard he worked and how well he provided. For a long time, I believed I was living up to that lesson. But when the economy shifted, when orders slowed, and when debts started to pile up, the walls began to close in. First, it was one missed payment, then another, then angry calls from suppliers who had once called me a friend. I tried everything, cutting costs, working longer hours, even selling off equipment, but it was like trying to stop a flood with my bare hands. The mill that had once buzzed with the sound of saws and men calling out over the machines grew quieter each week, until one day it fell silent altogether. That silence broke me more than the final notice pinned to my door. Walking through those empty rooms, seeing dust settle where sweat and work once thrived, I felt like I had failed not only myself, but every man who had swung an axe beside me. At home, the collapse carried heavier weight. My wife, Nora, had been my high school sweetheart. She had stood by me through years when money was tight and the mill demanded every ounce of me. But when the check stopped, when I came home carrying not pride but defeat, something in her shifted. She looked at me differently, as though I had shrunk before her eyes. One night, she stood in the kitchen with her arms crossed, the children asleep in their rooms. "Calvin, the children need stability," she said, her voice steady, but colder than I had ever heard it. "They need a roof that will not be taken away, food that will not run out. Right now, you are giving them despair. I cannot let them live in this shadow." I begged her to hold on, told her I would find another way, but she had already made her choice. A week later, she packed Clara's dresses and Henry's toy trucks into bags, loaded the car, and drove away. The taillights disappeared into the distance while I stood on the porch, unable to breathe. My children's faces pressed against the window haunt me still. Clara looked confused, Henry looked scared, and both of them looked at me as though I should stop it, but I could not. Losing the mill was like losing a part of myself. Losing them was like losing my soul. I thought family would rally around me, but the truth of hard times is that they reveal more than prosperity ever will. My younger brother Ezra had always been restless, always convinced he could do better than me, though he never put in the hours to prove it. When the mill fell, he did not offer comfort. He came to my house, stood in my kitchen and shook his head. "You've ruined everything Dad built," he said. "You're nothing but a worthless failure." The words struck me harder than any debt collector's call. Ezra's eyes carried no pity, only judgment. He left me standing there with those words lodged in my chest, words I could not shake no matter how I tried. My mother, Eveline, did her best to console me. She is a gentle woman, her hands worn from years of cooking and cleaning, her frame small but unyielding. She would sit across from me at the kitchen table, her tea steaming between us, and remind me that storms pass. "Your father believed in you, Calvin," she said. "He might not have shown it the way you wanted, but he was proud. You must not let this moment define you forever." Her words were kind, but they could not silence the fear that screamed inside me. Each day I woke with the weight of failure pressing against my chest. Each night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering what kind of man I was if I could not keep my family together, if I could not protect the legacy I had inherited. The town that once respected me turned its back as well. Men I had lent money to, neighbors whose homes I had helped repair, now crossed the street rather than meet my eyes. At the diner, I felt whispers crawl across the room like smoke. I had been the man who provided jobs, who carried weight with pride. Now, I was the man who had lost it all, the man people spoke about in hushed tones as though failure might be contagious. I tried to hold on to what little remained. I kept the old truck running, though barely, and walked through the mill grounds as though my presence could bring life back to its hollow bones, but the emptiness only deepened. The silence of those grounds mirrored the silence in my home, where laughter once filled the rooms and now only dust settled on the furniture. It was in that emptiness that my mind began to drift to my father. Raymond Mercer had been a stern man, never one to coddle, but he carried strength that others leaned on. He was buried on the hill at the edge of town, beneath an oak tree that had stood longer than any Mercer had lived. I visited his grave often, speaking words I wished I had said when he was alive. I asked him what I should do, where I should go, and why he had left me without guidance when I needed it most. I never expected an answer. But 2 weeks after Nora left, when my brother's words still burned in my ears and the shame of the town pressed on my shoulders, the phone rang. A number I did not recognize flashed across the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Calvin Mercer," the voice said, cold and unfamiliar. "Check under your father's grave. There's a box with your name on it." The words from that phone call echoed inside me long after the line went dead. "Check under your father's grave. There's a box with your name on it." I sat in the kitchen, staring at the phone, the silence of the house pressing down on me. Who would say such a thing? Who would know my father well enough to use his grave as a weapon against me? At first, I convinced myself it had to be a cruel prank. Ezra's voice haunted me. It sounded nothing like him, but the bitterness he carried toward me made him the most obvious suspect. It would not surprise me if he wanted to twist the knife deeper, to see me break even further. The thought filled me with anger, but also with fear. I drove to my mother's house that evening. Evelyn sat by the window, knitting in her chair, her eyes weary yet full of a quiet strength that had held our family together long after my father was gone. I told her about the call, about the voice, about the message I had been given. She listened without interrupting, her hands still moving the needles, the rhythm steady against my rising tension. When I finished, she placed the knitting in her lap and met my eyes. "Your father carried secrets, Calvin," she said carefully. "Not all of them were meant for you. He was a hard man, but he was not cruel. If something was buried, it was because he believed it should be left alone." Her words rattled me. My father had been private, stern, and sometimes distant, but I never imagined he carried secrets to his grave. I pressed her for more, but she shook her head and told me to leave the dead in peace. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The house felt emptier than ever. I pictured Nora tucking Clara and Henry into bed somewhere far away from me. I heard Ezra's voice again, calling me worthless. I thought of my father, standing over me as a boy, his hands guiding mine on an axe handle, telling me to grip tighter, stand firmer, swing harder. He had demanded strength, but he had also demanded silence. Secrets were a part of his nature. What if he had left something behind? What if this was not a prank at all? The days that followed were a torment. I tried to push the thought aside, but it clung to me. Each time I drove past the cemetery at the edge of town, my eyes drifted to the oak tree under which my father was buried. I imagined the dirt beneath it shifting, hiding something meant for me, something I had never been told. Meanwhile, my debts mounted. Collection letters arrived daily, and the bank threatened foreclosure on what little I had left. I had no steady work and no income. The humiliation deepened each time I passed neighbors who refused to meet my eyes. In town, whispers followed me. At the diner, men who once slapped me on the back now lowered their voices when I entered. I carried shame like a visible stain no one could ignore. I longed for comfort, but Nora remained silent. The children were kept from me, and though I left messages, none were returned. Ezra's words rang louder with each passing day. Worthless failure. Those words poisoned every waking hour. One evening, I returned to the cemetery. I told myself I was only going to visit my father's grave as I had many times before, but I could not shake the thought of the box. The oak tree towered above the headstone, its branches creaking in the wind. I stood there for an hour, staring at the ground, trying to gather the courage to believe or dismiss the voice on the phone. My hands shook with anger and fear. I whispered out loud, "If you left me something, Dad, why didn't you just say it?" The wind rustled the leaves, but no answer came. When I returned home, my mother was waiting for me. She had walked the distance from her house, something she rarely did at her age. She sat at my table, her voice firm. "Do not dig, Calvin. Some things are better left where they are. Your father gave you strength, not mysteries. If you go looking for what is hidden, you may find something you do not want to face." Her words stayed with me, but so did the call. I could not ignore it. The mystery ate at me every hour of the day. At night I woke, drenched in sweat, dreaming of digging with my bare hands, uncovering something I could not name. During the day, I heard the phantom of that voice, low and cold, telling me again to check under the grave. The conflict grew inside me like a fire. Reason told me to walk away, to heed my mother's warning, but desperation pushed me forward. I had nothing left. My wife and children were gone. My brother despised me. My friends had abandoned me. The town mocked me. What could be worse than the life I was already living? I stood in the yard one night, staring at the sky. The weight of failure pressed on my shoulders, but beneath it a spark began to flicker. If the box was real, it might hold something more than secrets. It might hold proof that my father had not considered me the failure everyone else believed me to be. It might hold a chance, however small, to start again. The longer I resisted, the stronger the temptation became. I knew that eventually I would have to make a choice. I could live the rest of my life haunted by the unknown, or I could face whatever truth waited beneath that oak tree. The decision came late one night when the silence in my house grew heavier than I could bear. I had been sitting at the kitchen table with the last letter from the bank in front of me, the words stamped in red ink spelling foreclosure. My chest felt hollow as I read it again and again. I had nothing left to lose. My family was gone. My reputation was ruined. My future looked like an endless stretch of shame and loneliness. The unknown voice had offered me something, and though I did not understand it, the promise of that box pulled at me with a force I could not fight anymore. I stood and went to the shed behind the house. My father's old shovel leaned against the wall, its handle worn smooth by his hands. I gripped it and felt the weight, as though he were testing me from beyond the grave. That night I decided I would go to the cemetery. I would dig, and I would find out the truth, whatever it might be. The hours crawled by until the sun sank and darkness covered the town. I paced the house, glancing at the clock, waiting for midnight. My stomach churned with nerves. Every sound made me jump. The creak of the floorboards, the whistle of the wind outside, the distant barking of a dog. I thought of my mother's warning. Her voice had been sharp when she told me not to dig. She had sounded almost afraid. But the more I remembered her fear, the more certain I became that there was something buried that mattered. When midnight finally came, I loaded the shovel into the truck and drove to the cemetery. The road was empty, the headlights cutting through the night. My hands gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I felt like a thief creeping toward a crime I did not fully understand. The cemetery gates stood open, and the gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled in. I parked near the edge, away from the main path, and killed the engine. The world fell into silence, broken only by the sigh of wind through the trees. I climbed out, my breath visible in the cool night air, and took the shovel from the truck bed. The oak tree rose ahead of me, its branches stretching like arms over the rows of stones. My father's grave lay at its base, marked by a weathered headstone carved with his name. I approached slowly, every step weighted with memory. I had stood here many times before, speaking to him in moments of doubt, asking questions he never answered. Tonight was different. Tonight I was not just visiting. Tonight I was here to unearth the truth. I hesitated at the grave, the shovel heavy in my hand. I whispered, "If you left me something, Dad, I need it now. If this is wrong, forgive me." Then I drove the blade into the earth. The sound of metal cutting soil filled the night. I dug in rhythm, every thrust of the shovel fueled by desperation and fear. Sweat gathered on my forehead despite the chill. My hands ached, but I did not stop. Each time the shovel struck the ground, I imagined my father watching, judging whether I was worthy to uncover what he had hidden. As the hole deepened, my breath grew ragged. I paused only to wipe dirt from my face before plunging the shovel down again. The soil grew heavier the deeper I went, but I pushed through it, gritting my teeth, refusing to surrender. My mind spun with questions. Why me? Why now? Who had called me? Then, at last, the shovel struck something solid. The sound was different, a dull thud against wood. My heart slammed against my ribs. I dropped to my knees and clawed at the soil with my hands until my fingers scraped against rough wood. There it was. A box, weathered by time but unmistakably real. I brushed away the dirt and pulled until it loosened. The box was heavier than I expected, but I managed to lift it from the earth and set it on the ground beside the hole. I sat back, my chest heaving, my hands trembling as I stared at it. Carved into the lid was one word. My name. Calvin. For a long moment I could not move. The world around me seemed to still. The trees whispered in the wind, the shadows deepened, and the box waited. My father's grave loomed above me, silent and cold. I felt the weight of his presence as though he were standing over me once again. Fear and anticipation battled inside me. This was not a prank. This was not a cruel joke. My father had left something for me, hidden under the ground where no one would find it unless guided to it. The realization sent a shiver down my spine. I placed my hands on the lid. The wood felt rough beneath my palms. My breath came in short bursts. I thought of Nora's face when she left, of Clara and Henry's eyes staring out the window of the car, of Ezra's voice calling me worthless, of my mother warning me to let the dead rest. All of it converged on this moment. With a deep breath, I pulled the lid open. The lid creaked as it gave way under my hands. The air that escaped from the box carried the smell of damp earth and aged wood. Inside, bundles wrapped in oilcloth sat neatly stacked, and beneath them, something metallic caught the moonlight. My pulse hammered in my ears as I reached inside and pulled the first bundle free. The cloth was brittle, but when I unwrapped it, I found a stack of letters, each one addressed to me in my father's firm handwriting. For a long moment I could not breathe. My father had never been a man of words. He had been stern, demanding, and often silent, but here before me lay pages and pages of his voice preserved in ink. I set them aside with trembling hands and uncovered the metallic glint at the bottom of the box. It was a small pouch, tied with twine, heavy in my palm. When I loosened the knot and opened it, gold coins spilled into my hand. Old, gleaming, worn smooth with age, but undeniably real. At the bottom of the box was a single folded note. It was newer than the letters, the ink darker, the edges less worn. My name was written across the front. I unfolded it slowly, and my father's words stared back at me. For when you think you have lost everything, a man's worth is not measured by what he builds, but by how he rises after the fall. These coins are not wealth, but a beginning. The letters will tell you the rest. Do not give up, Calvin. You are not a failure. The weight of those words crushed me. My throat tightened, and tears blurred my vision. I sat in the dirt with the note in my hands, the shovel lying forgotten beside me, and wept in a way I had not since I was a child. All my life I had wanted to hear my father say he was proud of me. He never had. He had pushed me, judged me, demanded more. Yet in death, through these words, he had given me what I had craved the most. I picked up the first letter and opened it. His handwriting filled the page in careful strokes. Son, if you are reading this, I am gone. You must understand that life will strip you bare. It will test you until you believe you cannot stand. But you must. I left you this not to rescue you, but to remind you that you carry my blood, my strength, and my will. You are more than your failures. Each word pierced me. It was as though he had written directly to the man I had become, as though he had known that one day I would sit broken at his grave. I read through 3 letters in the cold night air, each one peeling back layers of a man I thought I had known but never truly understood. He wrote about his regrets, his mistakes, his hope that I would be stronger where he had been weak. He admitted his failures as a father, confessed that his silence had been born of fear, not indifference. By the time I folded the last letter back into its cloth, I was shaking. My father had never spoken these words to me in life, but here they were, waiting for me at the lowest point of my existence. The gold coins gleamed beside me, but their weight was nothing compared to the weight of his words. I looked up at his headstone under the oak tree. For years I had spoken to the stone as though it were him, begging for guidance. Now I felt as if he had answered at last. My chest ached with the release of years of anger and disappointment. I whispered into the night, "Thank you, Dad." The silence of the cemetery surrounded me, but it no longer felt suffocating. It felt like presence, as though he stood just beyond the veil, watching. The pain of losing Nora, the sting of Ezra's words, the humiliation of the town, all of it still weighed on me, but now it sat differently. For the first time in months, I felt something other than despair. I felt a spark of strength. I gathered the letters, the pouch of coins, and the note, and placed them carefully back into the box. I carried it to the truck with reverence, as though I were carrying my father's voice itself. The night seemed sharper, the stars clearer, the air cleaner. My father had left me something more valuable than money. He had left me proof that he had seen me, that he had believed in me, even when I could not believe in myself. As I drove home, the road stretched out before me in a way that no longer felt hopeless. The coins would not solve all my problems. They were a beginning, just as he had written. The real treasure was the letters, the knowledge that my father had struggled too, that he had doubted himself, and yet he had found the strength to endure. I parked the truck in my yard and sat for a long time with the box in my lap. My hands no longer trembled. The fear that had consumed me gave way to a steady determination. My father had believed I could rise again. Now I had to prove him right. I sat in the yard until the first light of dawn pushed the darkness away. The box lay on the table beside me, the letters neatly stacked, the pouch of coins tied shut again, and my father's final note resting on top. I stared at it, the words etched into me like fire. You are not a failure. For the first time in months, I felt something shift inside. My life was still in pieces. Nora had left with the children, Ezra despised me, and the town whispered about my fall, but the despair that had chained me no longer held the same grip. My father's voice, silent in life but clear in death, had given me a lifeline. The coins became my first step forward. I took them to a local appraiser, not because I wanted to sell them for a quick escape, but because I wanted to know their worth. The man behind the counter examined them with wide eyes and told me they were old, valuable, and rare. I sold a few, enough to pay down some debts and buy tools I would need for work. I kept the rest hidden, not as wealth, but as a reminder of the beginning my father had promised. I started small, day labor on construction sites, hauling lumber for others rather than running my own mill. The work was hard and the pay low, but every night when I came home exhausted and covered in sweat, I felt something I had not felt in months. Pride. Honest, earned, and steady. Each swing of the hammer, each board I carried, built me back in ways money alone never could. My mother noticed the change first. Eveline came to my house one afternoon with a basket of food. She studied me as I carried it inside. "You are standing taller, Calvin," she said. "Your father would be glad." Her words warmed me, but they also reminded me of the task still ahead. I had lost Nora and the children. If there was anything I wanted more than rebuilding my finances, it was rebuilding their trust. Weeks turned into months. I kept working, kept saving, and kept reading my father's letters late at night. Each one seemed to anticipate the battles I faced. He wrote about shame, about the cruelty of others, about how easy it is to drown in bitterness. He warned me not to let anger define me, and he pushed me to fight for what mattered most. I clung to those words when exhaustion tempted me to quit. Eventually, I reached out to Nora again. I wrote her a letter of my own, not begging her to come back, but telling her the truth of what I had learned. I told her about the box, the letters, the coins, and how my father's voice had lifted me from despair. I told her I had found work, that I was standing again, and that no matter how long it took, I would prove to Clara and Henry that their father was not a broken man, but one who had the strength to rise. She did not respond immediately. Weeks passed with silence, but then, one Sunday afternoon, she came by with the children. Clara ran into my arms first, her small frame trembling with excitement. Henry hung back at first, uncertain, but when I knelt and looked into his eyes, he rushed forward and clung to me. Nora stood a few steps away, cautious, but her eyes softened when she saw me hold them. She did not say she had forgiven me, but she gave me the chance to try. That was more than I had dared to hope for. Ezra remained unchanged. He confronted me once more in town, his voice dripping with contempt. "You think swinging a hammer makes you less of a failure?" he asked. I met his eyes, calm for the first time. "I am not a failure, Ezra. Dad knew it, and I know it now. I don't need you to believe it." He sneered and walked away, but his words no longer cut me. My father's letters had filled the void Ezra tried to widen. As the months passed, I built not just a living, but a life again. The box remained in my home, not hidden in the ground, but placed on a shelf where I could see it. Each time I doubted myself, I opened a letter and read my father's words. They reminded me that the measure of a man is not in how far he falls, but in how he stands after the fall. Standing at his grave 1 year later, I placed fresh flowers on the headstone and spoke into the quiet morning. "I found the box, Dad, and I found myself. Thank you for believing in me when I no longer could." The oak tree rustled above, and though no voice answered, I felt at peace. This story is not just about loss, it is about discovery, redemption, and the power of words left behind. My father saved me long after he was gone. His belief carried me when my own strength was gone, and because of that, I can stand again. And now I want to speak to you. If you felt something in this story, if it reminded you of your own battles, your own scars, then let this message stay with you. You are not a failure. Whatever you have lost, whatever shame you carry, you have the power to rise again. Thank you for listening to my story. If it moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment and tell me what part spoke to you the most. Hit the like button so more people can find it. And subscribe to this channel if you want to hear more stories that dig deep into the heart. Together, we can keep these voices alive.